Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this live broadcast of 15 minutes here. It's our weekly web series for the Chamber of Commerce. I'm John Newstreet, President and CEO of the Kissimmee Osceola County Chamber of Commerce, where we are champions for business and community. We're joined by some fellow members and good friends of the Chamber today to recognize Memorial Day. It's coming up this Monday, maybe a day off for all of us, but it's really significant in many of our lives for those who have served or who have family members and friends who have served, and certainly those who have lost friends who have served. Memorial Day is highly important. There's a phrase in the veteran community that's all gave some and some gave all. And so carrying that mantra forward, we here in Kissimmee have some monuments we wanted to highlight for you and encourage you to visit, but certainly spend Memorial Day recognizing those who gave all, as it's said. So we'll bring up on screen here Terry Lloyd, who's done some research and again is a good friend of the Chamber. Terry, good morning and welcome.
Good morning.
So we're going to get right into a conversation here about a local memorial that you had done some research on. It was the first of its kind in the United States. And so I won't give it away. I'll tell you what the memorial, I'll have you tell the audience what the memorial is and tell us a little bit about it.
Well, about a year ago, for Memorial Day, I did a freelance piece for the Osceola News Gazette about the Bataan-Corregidor Memorial that is in the city's Lakefront Park in Kissimmee. I'm a military veteran myself, and when I first came to Kissimmee to work out at the airport, I saw the memorial, and I had spent some time in the Philippines on temporary duty, and was familiar with the story of the Bataan-Corregidor Death March. And so I was interested in the origins of the memorial. And when the possibility for a story came up, I did some research. First of all, for anybody who might not know, the event that the memorial depicts goes back to the very early days of World War II in the Philippines. The United States had a fairly large number of military forces in the Philippines at the start of the war. However, with the bombing of Pearl Harbor, they could not be reinforced. They fought a 4-month losing battle against the Japanese forces, and ultimately 76,000 Filipino and American soldiers ending up surrendering to the Japanese forces. The Japanese were neither prepared for that large number of prisoners, and in their military culture of the time, they felt that any soldier of any country that did not fight to the absolute death was a coward and just not worthy of any human consideration. So that set up the circumstances for a huge tragedy. These 76,000 soldiers, including 36,000 Americans, were marched without food, without water, in very hot conditions, very similar here to Florida, approximately 65 miles from Corregidor to a military installation called Camp O'Donnell. Again, no food, no water, and any of the Filipino civilians that tried to help them ultimately were beaten and killed by the Japanese soldiers. So that's the sad story. Ultimately, of the 36,000 American soldiers that were captured, only about 4,000 were liberated 3 years towards the end of the war. So in my research, at one time there was a retired Filipino government diplomat by the name of Mendenoro de Mesa, and also a city commissioner by the name of Richard Herring, who had lived in the Philippines. His father had been in the Air Force and had been stationed in the Philippines. And they got together and along with some people from the Filipino-American community, decided to do the memorial. They formed a foundation to raise funds. The city donated the land at Lakefront Park, and the memorial was unveiled in 1995.
So it was a 99-day battle over in the Philippines that then they had surrendered and did a 65-mile trek with no food or drink. So the 99 battle was fought with half rations because they knew they were in trouble. And then this led to a death march of 65 miles with no food, drink, medicine, help of whatsoever. And you liken it in your research, I'm not sure if you mentioned this, but it's to think about a 65-mile trek would be from here to Avon Park. Can you talk about that? Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And I've actually driven a good part of that route, and it's a long drive in a car.
Mm-hmm.
Just imagine after you've been fighting for 4 months, probably sick, any number of medical conditions, and poor food, and then absolutely nothing to sustain you on that journey.
Mm-hmm. I mean, these were, they call it the greatest generation, and this is just really a less known instance of how great some of these folks were, how strong they were to survive and what they endured. And so just an incredible story. And again, our memorial here is at Lakeside Park. And so, if you haven't visited, we encourage you to do it. It's a little piece of history. It's a great memorial. You can see the lake off to the left, and then Berlinski House will be up at the top of the screen there. So it's just that little stretch as you go towards the lake from where the library and Berlinski House are. So and I know it kind of got some greater recognition back in the Pokemon days, because I think there was a rare Pokemon you could get if you were walking around the park. But again, this is a somber memorial to a really tragic event, like you say. I'm blessed to have known a Bataan Death March survivor. Tracy Taylor lives over in Tampa. I've lost touch with him, so I'm not sure how he's doing these days, but just a very kind, gentle soul who is a survivor. And there was also a book written, Reprieve from Hell, about this experience that I've read. Congressman Micah, when he was in Congress, used to hand it out at veteran breakfasts. And so in the past, before I was chamber president, I was the department adjutant or state director of the American Legion here in Florida. So very big and passionate about veterans advocacy. And I've met a lot of our heroes and served a lot of our heroes. And Tracy's just one of those tremendous individuals who endured so much for freedom. And to have read Reprieve from Hell about that experience is really just humbling of what they would endure. So thanks for doing the research and for highlighting some of the history of the monument and the battle and this incredible death march. And I know there's some more information out there, so if we can provide links in the thread, we'll try to do that so you can follow up. The audience can follow up on doing some research. So anything else you want to share about the memorial or the Bataan Death March, Terry?
Well, you may have read this in the book that you mentioned. I've encountered several survivors in the past. If you notice on the memorial, one of the soldiers, the American soldier, wearing a helmet. And that is actually a World War I design helmet. And the reason I mentioned that is basically the American military started World War II with a lot of gear left over from World War I. And when those soldiers spent 3 years in a POW camp and were ultimately liberated, the uniforms, the helmets, a lot of stuff that would have been so familiar to a soldier had all changed by that time. And so for a time, there was some confusion when they saw American soldiers coming to liberate them. They actually didn't recognize them immediately as American soldiers.
Wow.
That much had changed. So I think that was a very eerie kind of end note to the whole grand tragedy there.
Tremendous point. I appreciate you sharing that for sure. So we've got one other topic to address, but I don't want to move on from this until we're comfortable that we've shared the right history. So is there anything else that's pertinent that we want to put to the audience here?
Well, I think from an American perspective, we tend to think about our own soldiers, but the sacrifices and the tragedy that came upon the Filipino people, who are our allies, is really inseparable from this. And I think that memorial, one of the best aspects of that memorial is it captures that in detail. the Filipino military and the Filipino civilians. Everybody was in that together.
Mm-hmm. And again, this was, you talked about the Filipino diplomat. There used to be a pretty strong Filipino community here, and I understand that's kind of eroded and they've moved on. Can you talk to that perhaps?
Yeah, I don't have too much detail, but when I did do some research and talk to some folks that were in Kissimmee at the time, they said there were a number of a high concentration of the medical community were Filipino-American or from the Philippines. Quite a number of doctors and nurses, and I don't know if that prominence has just faded with the growth in Osceola County over the last 30 years, or if this was a waypoint for a lot of people and they've moved on to other areas in Central Florida or the United States.
Well, still so many questions, and history only records so much, and but it took great effort to make this memorial happen, to recognize again just a tremendous event in the past. So we thank those folks for having done this, and we encourage everybody to go visit the memorial here. Especially Memorial Day is a perfect weekend. The weather's beautiful, the park is beautiful, and this memorial shares a lot of information about the history of the battle and the march and our friends over in the Philippines. So thanks again, Terry, for coming on and talking to us about it. And again, we'll try to continue to share some additional information for the audience to learn more. But this monument is here in our city. It's one of a kind, and it shares a lot of this history. If I can bring up Michelle Finnegan, she's with Osceola History. Hi, Michelle. Welcome, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me. So I'm the curator at Osceola History, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about dog tags. As a military brat, I always saw my dad wearing these tags, and in college, I actually did a lot of research on these. So military tags, or what we refer to as dog tags, actually has its origins in the Civil War, which a lot of people don't know. Since the war was fought on American soil, soldiers on both sides expected that their bodies would be returned to their families should they die in battle. But there was no system in place for either side on identifying fallen soldiers, so many of them took it onto their own hands to create their own identification tags. With no system in place for identifying fallen soldiers, the amount of unknown soldiers in Civil War era cemeteries is over 45%. It's an incredible amount. So many Civil War soldiers made their own tags out of common items. Some of them made it out of Bibles, pocket Bibles with information on their name, address, how to notify their next of kin. And we would see that a lot in the South. In the North, they actually commercialized on this a little bit. People were able to sell rings, metal tags, and stitched tags to put on your uniform. It was very different on either side, but still you saw a lot of people trying to identify their own bodies in the off chance something were to happen. But it really wasn't until 1906 that we would actually see dog tags being used in the military consistently. But prior to that, the first real attempt in identifying soldiers were corps badges. Each corps had its own emblem, and they would patch these on soldiers' uniforms. And some of them were made out of metal and cloth, but for the most part, it was just a stitched cloth. But it was actually really cool when I did my research. In 1862, a letter came to Secretary of War Stanton from a man named John Kennedy from New York. And he stated that each soldier should wear an identification in the form of a metal disc. And it was noted in the letter that it should be worn under the soldier's clothing. Now, that is a practice used today, but the first instance that we see that written is in a letter to Secretary of War Stanton. So 40 years after that, that was when we saw in 1906 that the U.S. military was utilizing the idea of identification tags. It was a 30mm aluminum disc stamped with a soldier's name. Yep, he's got it right over there. And their name, rank, company, regiment, or corps. And it had a hole on it where you could tie a cord. And they were when they were enlisted, they were only given one. Now we see people wearing a set of two, but prior to that, it was just a singular disc. Between 1910 and 1916, they moved to 35mm. Now, those are the World War II ones, which are made of stainless steel instead of aluminum, so that they were a little bit sturdier, and they were oval, and they had more information on them. By this time, the Army actually had dedicated numbers or service numbers for each military personnel, so that they actually had more identification on them. But it wasn't until 1972 that we actually used Social Security numbers, because that was when Social Security came around, and then your dog tag had your Social Security number. But now it's, since 2015, they've taken out the Social Security number, and they have put DOD numbers. So back to the World War II idea of military personnel identification numbers that are separate, which is pretty cool. But the idea of having a double tag was so that one would stay with the body and one would be taken with someone from their regiment, someone from their corps that could take their tag so it could be processed through the military. But on site of death, there would still be identification on the soldier, so that you or someone who came across this body would know who this man or woman was at that time. Since the idea of dog tags, and especially the double dog tags, the decrease of unknown soldiers has been exponential. The vast majority of World War I, World War II, Korean War, and Vietnam War casualties were identified and repatriated, many by the use of these dog tags. Now we also use DNA to repatriate soldiers and identify them. And there's a couple examples of just how important these tags were. In 1998, the tags and other identifying material allowed for the identification of Major Frank Blakey, who was an Army Air Force officer reported missing in New Guinea in 1944. And his body was found with the tags in 1998. So these tags are vitally important in making sure that soldiers can get the proper burial, can be repatriated. It is a part of their identity. They wear it all the time. It is their badge of honor. And it was really cool to do this research in college, I will say that.
Yeah, and look, I remember asking, the math teacher in middle school, are we ever going to use this? Well, here, you're using your college education. So and it benefits us all. Good work, and very fascinating stuff. Thanks for sharing, and certainly relevant today for those who have served or family members who still have their dog tags from their loved ones. And Terry, thanks for running the props there and showing us clear examples as she talked through it. So,
my pleasure.
Thanks so much, Terry.
So we'll end up, because we've hit time. We're actually just a little over, and so I've lost the military discipline that was instilled in me to stay at 15 minutes. But I do want to say thank you to all our veterans out there. Thank you for your sacrifice and your service. Just a personal point of personal privilege to recognize Tracy Taylor once again, and a shipmate who passed on in service was Kevin Reed Carpenter. Thinking of you, Kevin. And then we do have also the Museum of Military History, which is down West 192 in the corridor there towards the Celebration area. Lots of great artifacts there, so encourage you to make a visit there perhaps this weekend. And also our Osceola history, as noted, Michelle, they're recognizing some things and displays, so I encourage you to pop into the museum and support these local partners and recognize some of the important history that surrounds us. So it's one of our core values is embracing heritage here at the Chamber, and we're a very special place here in Florida and in the U.S. And so take time to appreciate it and recognize it. And again, on appreciation, want to thank Terry and Michelle for being with us today. And again, a big thank you out to all of our veterans. You truly are champions, and we appreciate you. We'll see you next week. Again, champions for business and community here at the Chamber. Thanks for being with us.